Interplanetary soul comes from somewhere outside of Earth, and the only reason that interplanetary or IT souls come to Earth is because they come from a healthy culture. They bring a more experienced perspective to humanity to do what they can to aid humanity.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Spiritually Challenged. I'm Jay Sherrick. I'm here with my writing partner,
David Ron.
And my good friend and neighbor, who's a little late today,
Steve.
Yeah, and we are very excited because we have a really exciting guest with us today. Thank you for being here, Linda Backman.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
We did an episode on Spiritually Challenged where I spoke about a past life, but also life between life regression session,
Right.
which I had.
And it was with Linda.
And Linda was
The practitioner.
practitioner.
All right.
In this field, Linda is one of the preeminent people, who does this kind of work. It took me a long time to get a time to to do this session with Linda.
Right.
She's highly in demand and she's extremely good at it. And so this is really kind of just fantastic to have you join us on the show.
It is fun and a great thrill and pleasure to be with you three.
Why don't we start by just telling us a little bit about your history, how you got to be doing this kind of work, how it all happened?
So in 1993, I'm in my middle 40s. I'm a licensed psychologist by training. And in 93, I've probably been in private practice, since the late 70s to early 80s. I had interests that might have looked spiritual, except I really didn't understand, much about soul and reincarnation. But I had already been doing a lot of grief counseling. I was involved with hospice work. I thought I knew why. I really didn't know why. So what happened on an April day in 1993 is that sadly, my original colleague, a psychologist with whom I built a group practice, a man who was 14 years younger than I, he passed from a type of lung cancer in April of 1993. And within about 48 hours of his passing, I became sure that I could feel his energy, that I was receiving intuitive communication from him. That was completely new to me. I didn't know how it worked, but I had actually no doubt.
And how did you respond emotionally to that kind of experience?
It was a combination. It was an incredibly warm feeling that sat alongside my grief.
So it was a mixture of grief, but also this profound experience of being connected to a human being or a former human being in this completely novel way for you.
Exactly. And so, I could, my colleague's nickname was Bud. So there was Bud somehow communicating with me, and I knew that, but I didn't know what to do with it. I decided to talk to my husband about what was going on. My husband and I had already been married about 25 years, but we had never talked about reincarnation. Earl knew Bud well. They played golf together. They had lunch together at times. I said to my husband, Earl, I said, well, I need to tell you what's going on. I'm sensing him. I really believe he's talking to me. And of course, I thought Earl was going to think this was bizarre. And I said to Earl, I also think he's showing me scenes in my mind's eye of past lives I've shared with him.
Wow.
Yes, it was wow. So I looked at Earl and his face was super calm. And so I said to him, why don't you think this is crazy? Don't you think this is that your wife's kind of losing it? And Earl just calmly said, no, I don't think that's weird. And I said, why not? And Earl looked at me and he said, well, I guess the reason I don't think it's weird is because of something that happened in my childhood that only on this day in 1993 do I remember. So I said, what do you mean? Earl said, well, now I remember that when I was a boy about 10 years old, growing up in rural Oregon, I would lay on the ground, watch the clouds go by, and I remembered my past lives in detail. Earl said, I knew they were my lives. I knew I was a man that lived in India, and I knew details of that life. But Earl said, Nobody ever spoke about that back in the middle 50s, where Earl grew up in a very kind of conservative, Christian, rural area. Earl said, I just blocked it out. So Earl said, look, if you're interested in this, I support you. Go for it. Go learn about this. Go study this. Do what you want to do with it. Today, I know that that opportunity was offered to me, if you will, from the soul level, that it was like, okay, quote unquote, Dr. Linda Backman, psychologist, do you want to shift your work? Do you want to move out of conventional psychology and move into understanding who are we as souls? Why are we here? Where do we come from? And a lot more that I know we're going to talk about today. That's the open door that came to me in 93.
Wow, that's amazing. When Bud gave you signs of your lives, past lives together, just give us a taste of what one of those lives might have been and what it might have looked like.
Well, since you're asking, one of the lives that I learned about subsequent to April of 93, I was a young woman from a prominent Farsi family, a family from Mumbai. I was a young woman that met a man who was involved in the era of Nehru,
Oh,
the era where India became independent from UK.
right.
And the man that I fell in love with ultimately is the man that was the founder of the country of Pakistan.
Oh, wow.
In terms of sort of how this worked, so this was the day Bud, or the day after Bud passed, as you experienced these past lives through the communication. Was he in each of these past lives? Did he tell you about them? What was it about him and your past lives? How did those two intersect?
Within 48 hours of Bud's passing, in my mind's eye, I was seeing just snippets of images. It was simply, it's kind of what, how intuition works. I was seeing just small images of more than one past life. And intuition can be imagery based, it can also be cognitive. So it was like a combination of seeing these images in my mind's eye, and then you might say getting download or getting hits of, oh, I'm in these past lives, and so is the soul of Bud.
Yeah. So sometimes it's visual, sometimes it's cognitive.
Well, okay, there's a quick example because
Yeah.
I've worked with a client like this. Okay, a child is born, they get old enough to speak. The child has a relative, a grandfather, an uncle, whoever it might be, who has passed and who passed before the child was born,
Right.
but the child has mannerisms or uses phrases or has a facial appearance. Often those are clues to, in fact, that child is the same soul as the grandfather, the uncle, whatever. So that does happen.
That does it happen frequently that the soul reincarnates within the lineage of that family?
It actually happens more often than people think.
Wow.
Yes, yes. Because most of us as a soul belong to what I like to call a soul pod, or a soul. I have a friend who calls it a soul posse. By that, I mean it's a group of the range of about 20 souls with whom we incarnate more often than any other souls.
Right. Right.
I know you guys, how you characterize your podcast from a skeptic standpoint.
Mhm.
Well, I was quite a skeptic for a long time. It was like, I'm a kind of a left brain person. I've always been that way. You also don't usually get through graduate school without being sufficiently left brained. I'm married to someone with a PhD in political science. So lots of kind of heady left brain stuff, if you will. So anyway, I started studying regression work. So simply put, if we study brain science, we know that when you're hooked up to EEG equipment, that equipment measures the cycles per second of your brain. And anytime we relax, it's later in the day and you're chatting with your spouse or you're, drinking a beer, a glass of wine, whatever. If you're hooked up to EEG equipment, the equipment shows that the cycles per second of your brain slow down as you relax. And we know through brain scan research that as we relax, the right hemisphere of our brain becomes more lit up on a brain scan as we relax because our intuitive human capabilities are held in our right brain. So regression means the regression therapist just guides you to relax with breathing, imagery, metaphor, and that leads us to be more open intuitively. And then, of course, the regression therapist has to be trained in how to guide regression. So that's what I do. And that's what I've done for probably 28, 29 years.
And you got training from basically like the guru, the one of the great breakthrough scientists in this field. Correct?
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true. You're talking about Dr. Michael Newton,
Yeah. I
who
have
is on the other
it.
side now.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's Michael's first book.
Right. And you trained with him directly, right? I mean, the Journey of Souls is a very famous book in the spiritual world, and so many people have read it. And he was basically your main teacher. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I trained with Michael back in the late 90s. I trained with him in between lives regression, which is past life leading to the soul level. So yes, Michael wrote the seminal books in regression that is both past life and soul level work. I trained with Michael, and then I was on the first board of what is now called the Newton Institute, and I co-taught with Michael for I co-taught regression with Michael for about 6 or 7 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us what you do. Like what, I mean, I obviously know because I did it with you.
Right.
But everyone else, most people don't. So tell us what you do.
Essentially, what I do is I guide clients to discover who they are as a soul and how that relates to their current life. So who we are as a soul includes a variety of pieces, but if we make it simple, who we are in life today both ties to past lives, ties to what happened in our past lives, what are some of the remnants and leftovers of what we might call karma, what are we balancing from past lives, what are we balancing in current life? Because we come into body with free will. One of the unique qualities of incarnating on Earth is that in these human bodies, we have free will. We can go against anything we planned. And so understanding past lives means what steps did I take in past lives that weren't the healthiest steps that today I could balance, as well as what did I accomplish in past lives. And whenever we accomplish a skill, a learning, a relationship, a capability of any sort, then it's embedded into what you might call your soul DNA. And we bring that with us into current life. I mean, for instance, a child that can be a very accomplished pianist at age 7, it's possible that child was an accomplished pianist in one of their past lives, just as an example.
Right.
So I guide people to discover past lives in order to either embrace or release elements of past lives in life today. And then I guide people all the way to the final scene in the past life. We go to the, if you will, the death scene. And then, and this is the unique work that Michael Newton created. And then we follow that journey that happens every time we die, where the slice, the fractal, the aspect of our soul that resided within us in a life automatically leaves the non-functioning physical body and elevates and like is on autopilot. And that slice of soul energy returns back to our higher self, or the totality of our soul that resides somewhere at a frequency higher than Earth. You can call it the spiritual realm, you can call it heaven, the celestial realm, call it what you want. Then we learn about how do we plan our current life.
I just want to say that, and then when we talked about my experience with Linda, that's exactly what happened. You led me into a past life in which I was some sort of I don't know, militia figure or military figure
Yeah.
in a Roman setting, and then had issues with that life, and then died. And then we tracked my progression into the world, the life between life. So it was exactly what you're saying. It was that protocol, basically.
And I think, Jay, I went back and looked at my notes before we started today in terms of your regression. And I think one of the key pieces, among more than one key piece, but one of the key pieces of your regression was for you to release the action you took in that past life and not feel like you shouldn't have done what you did because that's what you were told, that you were doing what you needed to do.
That was the core lesson of that experience. I don't know if you remember, but I had been involved in some violence which had harmed others in the role that I had been assigned, and I had a lot of conflict about it. And the experience that I then received in leaving that lifetime and going to a higher realm and speaking with my guides was, no, you use the word dharma.
Mhm.
No, you fulfilled your dharma. That was what you were meant to do. That was the role you were assigned. That was the responsibilities you were invested with, and you performed your task. And by the way, which is a core issue in my life, taking responsibility for others' suffering. And David has this as well. You know, it's an issue that has come up over and over in my life where I suffer for the pain of other people, which of course is compassionate on one level, but at some point there's a line, and you start to degrade yourself by taking on the responsibility of others that you can't really be responsible for. David, a issue in your life as well?
I would say that is a prime issue in my life.
Fortunately, Steve has very little compassion, so
it's not an issue for him.
Yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to say that the way you were describing what you do is exactly the experience I had.
No, and that's the beauty of understanding, where does this come from? Why do I always feel like I've got to take care of other people, or that I didn't take care of them well enough, that I didn't do enough? For I have people that come to me a lot with these kinds of things. Why can't I let go of this?
Right.
And often it's because we don't understand the core, sort of the triggering life, if you will. And once we understand the triggering life, most of the time we can either lessen or let go of that fear, phobia, action that just seems almost uncontrollable in current life.
Yeah. And what I think is so unique about your work is you have talked a lot about the nature of souls being most of the souls here on Earth are what you call earthbound souls. In other words, souls that often incarnate here on Earth and sort of like play out their karma here in this context of Earth, but that there are among us what you call interplanetary souls.
So there are three types of souls that agree to embody on Earth for the purposes of evolving humanity, if I make it simple. One type is what you just said, Jay, and the term is earth-based, not earthbound.
Sorry.
So earth-based means when your soul was created, your soul was designed to primarily embody on Earth in order to evolve as an individual soul, lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, and ultimately to aid the evolution of humanity. That is the most common, that most people on Earth are earth-based souls. Then there's two other types of souls that can choose, and I underscore the word choose. We're never forced to incarnate. It's always a choice. So the two other types of souls that may come to Earth, or actually some do come to Earth. One is interplanetary souls. Interplanetary souls, I'm going to back up a half step.
Sure.
When we're in body, we always have a higher self. In other words, when we're incarnate, the slice of our soul that resides within our body that causes us to live and breathe is a holographic aspect of the totality of our soul. The remainder of our soul is our higher self. So there are some people on Earth who are incarnate interplanetary souls. What that means is that the higher self of those people on Earth, that higher self resides somewhere outside of Earth's energy, outside of Earth's frequency. It could be a planet, it could be a star system, it could be interdimensional space, but an interplanetary soul comes from somewhere outside of Earth, and the only reason that interplanetary or IP souls come to Earth is because they come from a healthy culture outside of Earth. They bring a more experienced perspective to humanity to do what they can to aid humanity. So that's an interplanetary soul. Then the third type of soul, there are souls that come from what we would call the angelic realm. The angelic realm is a group of souls that serve source. Call it source, call it the divine, call it God, call it great spirit, call it what you want. There is a guidance system that the signature energy is love and compassion. We'll just call it source to make it simple. Angelic souls are ambassadors or emissaries of source energy. Some angelic souls do incarnate on Earth because we don't have enough love and compassion on this planet.
So when you talk about like great spiritual and religious figures, you know, like Buddha and Jesus, and you know, and those people would fall into that angelic category in your estimation?
No, actually not. I know a fair amount about both of those souls. The Jesus soul, which I prefer to call Yeshua, because Jesus was a Greek name given to
Right.
that soul post crucifixion. Um, the the Jesus or the Yeshua soul is a soul that had past lives before the life as Jesus of Nazareth, and that soul is actually an earth-based soul.
Oh.
That is not an angelic soul.
Oh,
Yeah.
and now I'm curious about Buddha. What did you find out there?
Yeah. My understanding about Buddha is also an advanced earth-based soul and not an angelic soul.
Wow. And so are there examples of angelic souls that we would all be familiar with?
So what I know is that archangels are real. Archangels are the coordinators of the angelic realm. So archangels relate directly to source. Some of the archangels continue to incarnate. Some of the archangels, including Archangel Michael and Archangel Gabriel, those souls incarnate on Earth today, usually in more than one simultaneous incarnation. And people might then start thinking, oh my gosh, well, I know this amazing spiritual teacher, or I know this amazing clergy person that just I so respect her, whoever. Often these souls are just regular people.
It's just the butcher
They're
down the street.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. It's your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
We make the mistake of minimizing ourselves and elevating everybody else
Yeah.
as humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Maybe 5 to 8 years into my regression practice, I started noticing that about 50% of my clients were discovering they were interplanetary souls. So I said to I have learned how to talk and ask questions to my guides. It took me a while to learn how to do that. So I said to my guides, sort of like, and I can sort of talk to them like they're anybody. It's sort of like, okay, what's up, guys? It's like, why did you want me to start working with so many IP soul clients? And basically, what I was told is that because interplanetary souls are always quite advanced, they come to try to aid humanity. And so but they struggle. They come here and they're trying to function in a unique culture that they're not used to. They're trying to function in a human body that they're also not used to. So they have everything from minor allergies and minor digestive disorders, as just some possible examples, to serious, complicating autoimmune disorders. At times, they're diagnosed on the autistic spectrum. They have trouble just fitting into our everyday human culture and functioning in these human bodies. So basically, my guide said, Linda, we want you to help them to understand who they are so they can remain here and do what they came to do, essentially.
Yeah, that's one of the striking things about reading your book, which, by the way, your book is fantastic. It's called Souls on Earth, is that these interplanetary beings, souls, have come to Earth to help us, and they seem to be really suffering and struggling. And you're like, well, did they come to help, or they came here to work through stuff? Or, it's kind of, it's confusing a little bit, I guess.
So, all interplanetary souls aren't struggling day by day with dietary issues where they can only eat five things. Um, but these interplanetary souls need to understand, why am I lactose intolerant? Why do I have this allergy? Why do I need to stay out of crowds? Why do I like to spend a lot of time on my own writing or, composing music or, whatever it might be? It's simply to understand and accept ourselves and move forward with who we are.
Yeah, so even though they're here to help Earth, they're also growing and evolving. And yeah, I think you used the term wounded healer in your book, or that comes up in your, is that what that's about?
Not exactly. Think about soul evolution on a 10-point scale, with 10 being, very high. Soul evolution meaning wisdom, perspective, understanding, compassion. IP souls come to Earth usually as at least a 7.
Right.
So they're not a 9.8,
Right.
but they are usually a 7.
So I want to draw a connection here because David has had a very profound experience listening to what's this podcast called the Telepathy Tapes. Have you listened to that or heard of it?
Actually, I have not heard of it.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh well,
I highly recommend it.
David got a lot out of it.
Okay.
I mean, in a nutshell, it's about non-speaking autistics who exhibit high levels of telepathy and are able to communicate with their caregivers and each other telepathically.
Right.
And it's just amazing.
And just the crossover is in your work. You talk about how IP souls, I don't know, you talk about autism and ADHD, and you talk about social anxiety as some of the hallmarks that potentially signal IP souls.
Yes.
And then David listens to this podcast about, these souls who are highly autistic, but having incredible spiritual abilities, right?
Yeah.
Right. And, I've worked a lot with adults like that. I don't work with young children, but I do work with teenage kids. But yeah, if you talk to the parents of an autistic child who's, has a lot of autistic symptoms, usually the parents are talking about, my child is so wise and my child is so, there's a sense of loving. The example I always think of is a few years ago, there was a man that won America's Got Talent. And he's visually impaired. He's also on the autistic spectrum. And he writes and plays music. He's basically a singer-songwriter. And he's amazingly gifted. I've never regressed this particular capable musician, but I would be quite sure he's probably an IP soul.
Right.
And yeah, we miscategorize people,
Yeah.
sadly, in our human culture. And in fact, it's interesting because some of what you just said, Jay, has been coming up of late in my regression sessions, as well as talking to my own guides. Yes, it's like the spiritual guides that seek to aid humanity have a lot of concerns, and we won't walk down that path. This is not, a conversation that we're going to have about, complicated things that are going on our planet. But the guides of Earth are constantly trying to figure out How can we get humans to wake up, to stop being divisive, to stop pigeonholing people, to stop, again, mislabeling people? And so, yes, of late, I'm told through clients and my own intuitive downloads, you might say, that the guides are planning for there to be more IP souls to come to Earth
Even more
to
coming.
aid humanity,
Well, we need all the help we can get.
for sure.
Yeah. Are there, when you were talking about these interplanetary souls and these other realms and stuff like that, are all other realms more advanced and peaceful than we are? Or are there realms that are more warlike, more chaotic, more does it sort of run the gamut?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's my understanding that all other realms are not evolved, healthy, calm, uh, filled with love and compassion, that there are realms that would seek to slow down humanity's evolution.
But they don't necessarily send souls to incarnate on our planet.
Correct. What I know is there was a lot of involvement of interplanetary souls in the development of the earliest, the three earliest civilizations are Egypt, what used to be called Mesopotamia, or where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers come together, and then a civilization in today what is southern Pakistan called the Indus River civilization. Those are the three oldest civilizations on Earth. There were interplanetary souls heavily involved in the development of early civilization. Interplanetary souls have different energetic skills than perhaps some of the Earth-based souls that come to Earth. But I know it gets so confusing. But to make it even more confusing, the earliest Earth-based souls that came to incarnate were originally interplanetary souls because they had to come from somewhere. And then many of us, I'm actually an example of this, then many of us who came to Earth long ago in the beginning of civilization on Earth, we were IP souls, but then we no longer returned to our home location in the broader celestial realm, and we incarnated only on Earth.
Right. And transitioned into becoming Earth-based souls.
It's very interesting, Linda. I had a quick question for you in terms of the outcomes that your clients hope for as they meet with you. Just to make a really simple example, which I sometimes do. I have a little bit of an obsession of constantly making sure the stove is off. Okay, let's say that was making my life crazy. I was always doing it. I came to you and you said, well, in a past life, your mother was cooking dinner and forgot to turn the stove off and the house burned down. And I would say, okay, that's interesting. Now I understand why I do it. But I mean, would that help me change my behavior?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question because what you're asking, Steve, is about the therapeutic aspect of why I do what I do. And at the core of me, I'm a therapist. That's why I love regression, is because, and I have I know a lot of very capable mediums and channels, and that's a wonderful skill and helps people a lot. And I'm not opposed to that in any way. But when I guide the client, I mean, let's just say theoretically, Steve, what you just said is true. So when I guide the client, and I don't know where they're going to go in the regression at all, when the client themselves goes into the past life where theoretically the mother was cooking and something caught on fire and the soul of my client gets out of the house, but the mother dies in the house, going through that inch by inch yourself helps to release the trauma that's remnants of the past life. That's why regression to me is a very powerful tool. One of the reasons. Yeah.
Awareness of why you have this habit and why you have this inclination is a big part of the healing, is basically what you're saying.
Absolutely. But it's the left brain, right brain components that have to work together. It's okay, I understand from my cognitive mind, but I felt the trauma of the fire when I escaped the house. that
Right.
I thought I wouldn't get out. And I went through it inch by inch in the regression. I have to teach people, when I train people in regression, I have to teach people learning to guide regression to let the emotions be there for the client, not to let them be there for 20 or 30 minutes and they get stuck in them, but to feel the emotions, because that's part of the release process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you find that anyone can be regressed, or are there people that are
Yeah.
very resistant?
Yeah, people ask me that all the time, and I have to be honest and feel like I'm not being ego based when I say this. I almost never have a client that doesn't regress.
And do you use hypnosis? Is it like hypnosis based, or is it just a different modality that you use to get them there?
It technically is hypnosis based, but people often misunderstand hypnosis. Hypnosis is purely relaxation. But yes, it is hypnosis.
And so just in your,
Yeah.
I'm interested, like in your experience, you described in some detail having been in the militia and so forth. How did that, if you don't mind describing, Linda knows this because you narrated what you were
Yeah,
feeling? Or
I
Linda-
narrated. And what's so interesting about the session is, while I was going through it, it was like, you're going off your intuition and everything like that, and I'm watching myself. There's some part of me that's watching myself go through this and like, is this legit? Am I? But then you go back and listen to it because you give me a recording, and you're
Right.
like, wow, there was a lot of detail in there.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you went back and listened, there were a lot of things you said that you weren't even totally aware that you'd said. It
Yeah,
sounds like.
or it was like, I don't know where that would have come from
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't like, and it rang true, and you go, this is legit.
Yeah.
I felt very connected to what was said.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to hear a little bit about your connection with your own guides. You say you speak to them regularly. Tell me a little bit, who are your guides? Who do you connect with? Who guides you?
Okay, awesome. That's easy. So, as I already said, I'm an Earth-based soul. So, when you're an Earth-based soul, you have a primary guide. Earth-based souls always have a primary guide, usually a team of guides that support them. When I began this current incarnation, I had a guide that had been my guide for many previous lifetimes.
Do you talk to your guide just like just in your head? You sort of talk to.
I do. I do it in a cognitive way because I'm rather left-brained. I can just ask a question, and not always, but I can ask a question in my mind to my guide and receive an answer.
And that's your primary connection. Even though there's probably a team of guides, you really focus your connection is focused on this one individual.
Most of the time. Most of the time. A unique piece that I think people just need to hear about, because it's an important point that I learned over the course of years of clients. Interplanetary souls and angelic realm souls often guide themselves. And what I mean by that is, I'd say about 80% of all IPs and angelic realm souls, the higher self of an IP client or an angelic realm client, what I call an AR, it's their own soul, their higher self, that is their primary guide because they are already rather evolved.
Right. And as you were talking about before, there's a separation of the part of you that comes here and incarnates, and then the higher soul remains in some sort of non-physical realm. And for those individuals, they are their own guide, is what you're saying.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, last question. I know you dodged it before, but I'm going to give it to you again.
Okay.
Based on your research,
Yeah.
do you think humanity is going to make it?
Good question. I suspect that humanity is going to make it. How long that takes, I don't. It's not going to happen in my lifetime, for sure. It's probably not. I have children and grandchildren. It may not happen in my children's lifetime, but I think we have a heck of a lot of work to do, and it's just what you guys are doing that aids humanity's survival, because you're putting information out to people to chew on. The only way that Earth/humanity survives is through our human actions. There isn't a force that's going to come here and fix us, so to speak, and, oh, we're going to be a healthy culture. That's the responsibility of those of us in body on Earth.
Yeah, so many of the voices that I have connected with, guidance being the main one, but other people who we've had on the show and just other people I talk to, they talk about there is this change happening on the planet, that there's this, growing awareness of spirituality and higher consciousness. Do you see that reflected in your work?
Yes, I see that in my work. And sure, I only work with a certain segment of the population, but my work, I'm as busy as I can be. And so that says there are people out there wanting to learn more. But just last week, there was some new research from the Pew Foundation, and it shows that a greater number of people are seeking spiritual understanding. They may or may not be involved in organized religion,
Right.
but they're seeking a spiritual perspective.
Hopeful.
So we need to diagnose very quickly. Because you're an expert, we need to diagnose David and Steve and find out whether they're interplanetary souls or Earth-based souls in your final moments here. Will you do that for us, Linda, real quickly? I know I'm sort of half joking, but take a shot.
Well, if you're asking me, Jay, sort of like, how might you know, without regression, how might you know if someone's Earth-based and how might you know if someone's interplanetary? And for now, we'll leave Angelic Realm out of it. Well, for one, Earth-based souls tend to do fairly well in the human body.
Right.
Earth-based souls tend to be fairly cognitive and just tend to do fairly well living on Earth. Interplanetary souls have a lot more health issues, emotional issues, sleep issues, and well, okay, this just popped into my mind, so it's useful to share this. Often if I'm working with an interplanetary soul and they discover that they're IP in the regression, when we're processing the regression, when we finish the regression, the client will say, it makes sense to me that I'm IP, and I'll say, why? And they'll say, when I was a child, my parents told me that even at age 3, 4, and 5, all I wanted to do is stare out at the night sky, and I was fascinated with the night sky, and I wanted to be out there.
That's interesting.
That never happened to me as a child.
All right, so let's just go around the horn real quick. So, David, close your eyes, and in your heart of hearts, do you feel you're an interplanetary soul or an earthbound soul?
No, I think I'm an earth-based soul.
Earth-based soul. I misspoke.
But I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, Steve.
I don't know either, but I'm going to sort of...
Don't do an intellectual thing. Steve always gets in his head, so we have to get Steve into his heart a little. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. It's so awkward.
I'm going to go, Alex. I'm going to go with Earth-based for 200.
All right. So we have these two claiming to be, and in my regression, I found I connected with the idea that I'm an Earth-based soul as well.
Right.
So we're all for Earth-based souls.
And did you say most?
Now I'm thinking maybe I'm interplanetary.
Did you say that
David has switched. Hold on,
I'm switching now.
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
David, it's just a gut sense, because obviously I haven't guided you, but I have the sense you're probably right, David, that you're IP.
I'm kind of feeling that now. As I said, Earth-based, I was like, that's not true.
Which, by the way, is consistent with things that guidance told you, correct?
Yeah, guidance told me that I had lived in another realm and a different species and stuff like that.
All right, awesome.
Anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Linda Backman, for being with us and sharing so much information, which has utterly confused David and sent him back.
That's great.
Send him back forever. And we'd love to have you on the show again. And we're really excited about your new book, which is coming out. And when is it coming out?
Probably June. Yeah.
June. And it's called what?
It's called Soul Design.
Okay, so we need to have another session where we hear about that, because that's going to be focused on angelic realm souls.
It's broadly focused, but it has a lot of angelic material in it.
Such a joy to have you. Thank you for educating us.
It's really nice
You're
meeting
totally
you
welcome.
too.
Pleasure.
Thank you for
Thank you.
Thank you. You're totally welcome. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Spiritually Challenged on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.